Hi everyone and welcome back to my booktube channel Lisa in Bookland. Today I'm bringing you a very exciting video which is my top books of 2022. In 2022 I read 128 books. Even before starting booktube I always did go through and pick out my top books. I never had a set number. I always just kind of looked at the list of books I'd read, usually filtered to the ones I'd given like 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10, and then picked how many I thought like stood out to me. And I have to say this year is definitely the hardest it's been for me to pick the ones that stuck out for me. And so I've had a really good reading year. I probably did become a bit more selective about my reading and was influenced a lot more by booktube recommendations. So this year I did manage to whittle it down to 11 favourite books and 2 honourable mentions, which is more than I would usually have. I think the last few years I've had like 6 or 7 favourite books, but that is obviously no bad thing. I'm delighted I read so many good books. So yeah, some of these were my favourite books and I knew they were going to be my favourite books all along, and then some books, you know, I really love them but they just stuck with me more than I expected. So yeah, these are in no particular order, just the order I suppose I thought of them, or the order that they just happened to be sitting beside me. I'll probably be talking about them in a shorter way or in a different kind of way, maybe at a more distant time point than I did at the original time of reading, so I'll leave my original monthly wrap-ups for each of these books listed down below. So firstly, I suppose to mention the honourable mentions. I still do really love both of these books, but for various reasons they just don't fall into that top category, but I still did want to talk to them. So the first honourable mention I'm going to talk about is this book, We the Drowned by Kirsten Jensen, which is translated by Charlotte Barsland with Emma Ryder. So it's translated from the Danish, and if it lost anything in translation it definitely isn't apparent because it was written so beautifully. So this book follows the inhabitants of a town called Marstal in Denmark over multiple generations, and because it's a coastal town, most of definitely the men and boys in the town are involved with the sea for their livelihood for some way. It very much focuses, I suppose, on wars, starting off in 1848 when Denmark went to war with Germany, and a lot of the boys become involved in that war through the navy, and ends up then in the Second World War. So I hadn't read a lot really of war at sea after the Napoleonic Wars, so this is new for me and I definitely learned a lot. The differences, especially the later Second World War, just like the claustrophobic nature, I think, of the ships rather than the like more wooden walled ones I'd be used to. But apart from all that, really, it's the characters in this book are amazing. So because you're following them over multiple generations, you do kind of see the entire of the characters' lives and how the different characters and their descendants kind of interact with each other over years, and it was just written so well. It follows, I've already covered, I suppose, the lives of the people at sea, but it also very much covered the lives of the people left behind. I found this book quite, like, obviously it is quite heavy and lyrical, so I wasn't terribly like excited to pick it up all the time, which is maybe why it's not in my absolute top books. But it was one of those books, like I'd say like the Wolf Hall series, when I did pick it up I just read like 200 pages at a time. Like, it's really immersive, and really did stick in my mind, and the language is just so beautiful, and it kind of it's beautiful language, but also there's like moments of like black humour as well, which I found enjoyable to read. And I should have realised this way earlier, but for a while at the start of the book I was kind of trying to figure out who the narrator was. I was a bit confused, and then I thought about the title, We the Drowned. The narrators are obviously the drowned of the town, which I should have copped on to way earlier, but when I did realise that, it definitely added an extra dimension to the story. It has such a memorable first line. Like, the first section is called The Boots, and it says, "Many years ago there lived a man called Lawrence Madsen, who went up to heaven and came down again thanks to his boots. He didn't soar as high as the tip of the mast on a full-rigged ship. In fact, he got no further than the main. Once up there, he stood outside the pearly gates and saw St. Peter, though the guardian of the gateway to the hereafter merely flashed his bare arse at him. Lawrence Madsen should have been dead, but death didn't want him, and he came back down again a changed man." And Lawrence, I'd say his fate definitely kind of rattles through the rest of the book. He's probably the main character, if you can have a main character in a multi-generational story. But yeah, I just found this book so enjoyable, and I know I will be rereading it in the future. I don't know if any more of Karsten Jensen's books have been translated, or if he wrote any more books, but I definitely will have to follow up on that, because this was really, really wonderful, and if you like these stories, I definitely recommend. So the other honourable mention I'm going to say is a book I really enjoyed as well and read over the course of a day, and that's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I got it out of the library, so I don't have a physical copy with me at the moment. So this is a book I've had on my radar for a very long time. It's very hard to say anything about it without spoiling it. But basically the plot starts off following these characters who are in a school, and you know there's something kind of a bit different or a bit strange about the school. But yeah, the plot unfolds from there, and just the number one I have to say about this book is definitely try to get as little spoilers as possible, because it's just the way that the world unfolds or the revelations are made, it just really keeps you gripped. The characters and their relationships, I suppose, it is kind of a hard book to read sometimes. Maybe that's why it's not in my top book. Maybe I'd have preferred some things to happen a little bit differently, so it just didn't make it in my top 11 books. But yeah, it's only the second Kazuo Ishiguro book I've read, but I'll definitely be reading more. So the first book I'm going to talk about, I know I've talked about it a lot of times on this channel before, and that's Circle of Friends by Maeve Binchy. So I read this for the Irish Readathon back in March, and this is definitely, I think, was the highlight of the Irish Readathon for me. It's the first Maeve Binchy I had read, so it was a great way to discover that author as well. And I have read another of her books since, but Circle of Friends definitely remains my favourite. So this is two girls from an Irish village called Knocknaglen back in, I think, the 1950s, who move up to Dublin for college or for work. They're from kind of different backgrounds. Evie was raised in a convent by nuns after her mother died, and she was kind of cast out from her mother's family, and Benny grows up in a very loving household who are actually shopkeepers in the town. Just the various things they get up to in Dublin. I have always loved like college books or university settings. Like, I wouldn't say that this book focuses very much on the academic side, but I think it does definitely really capture that feeling of like girls going up to Dublin for the first time, where you're going to live, you know, the people you meet there, meeting new types of people. I loved the fact that it was set in the 1950s as well, just like the way they got ready for dances, and I just love the whole kind of background. And also when they go back to Knocknaglen as well, quite a lot of the story takes place there, and yeah, just how close-knit a community it was. It was really just such a heartwarming book and so funny, and yeah, I just adored this, and I swallowed it up in like a day or two. So the next book I'm going to talk about then is this one, Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier, which I did as a buddy read. It was my second Tracy Chevalier, and I'm definitely enraptured by her. It was brilliant. I still have so many more to read, but I can tell she's going to be a favourite author of mine. I love the way she writes, but probably more importantly, I love the things she writes about. Like A Single Thread was the other one I read. I also read it this year, and they could both very well have been in my top books of the year. I chose this one, I suppose, because I liked the background of it more, and it didn't have a ending that I was conflicted about like A Single Thread. But anyways, so this book is about Mary Anning, who was kind of a fossil hunter that was very well known back in the 1800s, and this book covers kind of her friendship with another fossil hunter called Elizabeth Philpott. Elizabeth has moved down to Lyme Regis with her sisters because their brother has basically kicked them out of their house, Sense and Sensibility style. Elizabeth is from a much wealthier background than Mary, but they managed to form this friendship, and the way they kind of help each other and complications and challenges that they have with their friendship, definitely it was just wonderful to read about, and like had so many reflections on class, which is one of my favourite things to read about in books. But not only is there a lot about class, there's a lot about like these women being in a men's world, I suppose, and even Elizabeth with her higher class status is barred out from a lot of places that she would like to be. Such a brilliant book with so much to think about, and also a brilliant start. Lightning has struck me all my life. Just once was it real. I shouldn't remember it, for I was little more than a baby, but I do remember. And that's Mary Anning. She actually was struck by lightning when she was a baby. So yeah, it was also really fun throughout this book, really, to like there's some bizarre things and bizarre characters that appear in this book, and like I kept like looking them up to see if they were real, and they were. So yeah, that was just a little fun thing for this as well. I did like learning about fossils and paleontology when I was in college, so it was nice to return to that as well. So I love that it was set in Lyme Regis as well, because I was there before and it's beautiful, so it brought back happy memories of me for that. This book made me really want to go to it again. Like, I mean, the last time I was in Lyme Regis, I suppose I was more focused on the Jane Austen connection than the paleontology, which is what Lyme Regis is kind of most well known for. So yeah, I would like to go to it again with that mindset. But also the next time I'm in London, I'm definitely going to go to the Natural History Museum and see some of Mary Anning's dinosaurs for myself. I don't know if any of Elizabeth Philpott's specimens are in the Natural History Museum. I think they're mostly in Lyme Regis according to the back of this book, but yeah, great book, and I can't wait to read more Tracy Chevalier. So the next two books I'm going to talk about are classics. I read these both as part of October, but the first one I'm going to talk about is a play, and it's called The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. This obviously is just a short little play, but I rarely laughed so much at a book. It was so funny. Although I read it at the time on ebook, I actually got this collection of Oscar Wilde's plays for Christmas, because I definitely want to read more. So The Importance of Being Earnest starts out in this person's flat in London. I think his name is Algernon and the other person is Jack, I think. Anyways, they're both two friends, they're talking in a flat in London, and basically they both have a reason for calling themselves Earnest at some point in their lives, and yeah, it's just so funny. And one of them in particular, the Jack character, is so naughty and makes Algernon's life quite difficult for him on purpose, so it's hysterical. So yeah, definitely can't wait to read more Oscar Wilde. I read The Picture of Dorian Gray a good few years ago, so I'm gonna revisit that as well. But yeah, the plays, I just can't wait to see them, and I'm keeping my eyes peeled for any performances around Ireland I can go to. Have Car Will Travel. The other Victorian book I'm going to talk about then is Tess the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. I'd read Thomas Hardy before, but not for a while, and this really reminded me of why I should read more Thomas Hardy, and I recently read The Trumpet Major, and I think he's going to be a favourite author for me now. But anyways, Tess the D'Urbervilles, the most thing I'd heard about it was that it was very sad and depressing, which it definitely is. It's unrelentingly sad and depressing. Like, I mean, the one thing I did know that was depressing happened quite earlier in the book, and it kept going downhill from there. But I just find Hardy so easy to read. Like, you know, I read this again in just a couple of days. It was wonderful. But yeah, the characters in Tess are all so great. Like, I mean, Tess herself, so many bad things happen to her, but she manages to keep going. Hardy's women are actually quite good. Like, you know, there's some nice female friendships in this book as well, like complicated ones, but they're nice to read. And I also loved all the little agricultural and countryside details for which Hardy is like quite famous, I suppose. A lot of this book takes part in a dairy, and I just loved the background of that. So yeah, Tess the D'Urbervilles as a favourite book in itself, but also like as a gateway and a reminder that I should read more Thomas Hardy, I suppose. It makes it into my top books of the year. So the next book is another book that I read earlier in the year, and that's Workshes Take by Daniel Wiles. I actually bought this in Cornwall while I was over there on the same day that I saw a copper mine. I saw this book in a shop, it was just published, and I said I'd pick it up because it was set in a mining town a little bit later than the mine I saw was in operation, but it's set in 1870s in a coal mine, and it follows this miner called Michael. One day he and his mining partner are down the mine, and they discover a seam of gold, and it's about how that could change their life, and you know how they're going to deal with this discovery. Really, it's more of a character study of, I suppose, miners in this time, and like the poverty and the hard working conditions they were under. Michael actually works 2 mining jobs to try and save enough money for his son to go to school, so that his son won't have to go down the mines, which is obviously a very dangerous occupation. But yeah, at times in this book your heart would just break for him. It's such a short little book, it like packs so much into it, and some things are kind of just like hinted at, which I think was so, it made me think about things a lot more. Like, you know, there's something going on with his mining partner's background, which you kind of have to put together. His relationship with his wife was really, really interesting. You can kind of tell that all is not really well with them, but you're not really sure what's going on. And yeah, just it was such a wonderful book. I highly recommend this new release. It's a debut from this author as well, so yeah, really enjoyed it, and we'll be looking out for more by him. Definitely the weirdest book I read this year is this one, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. But fortunately for me, it was exactly the right type of weirdness. I had been keeping my eye on this book for so long. I'd heard people talking about it. It won the Women's Prize, but I hadn't had the courage to pick it up yet, and I finally did, and I'm so glad I did. It's about this man who is called Piranesi, and he's in this like labyrinthine structure called the house. There's just full of like Roman columns and statues and tides, and once a week he's completely by himself, apart from once a week he meets this other man and they talk about things. It's just so weird, and I thought it'd be too weird, but it's not. And Piranesi is such a lovable and honourable character. He's such great company. I'd love to spend a day walking around the halls with him. But also there's like the mystery aspect, obviously, of like, what is the house and why is he there? So but yeah, I was just really caught up by the story, and the writing again is beautiful, if weird as well. So it's kind of it's written in the form of like a diary, and the first entry is like dated entry for the first day of the 5th month in the year that the albatross came to the southwestern halls. So yeah, there's no like month or number of days or anything. It's just yeah, he has come up with his own little system. So yeah, if any of that sounds like it might be your thing, definitely go for it. And I definitely want to reread Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because I don't appreciate it that fully at the time. So yeah, great book. So the next book is another new release, and from a favourite author of mine, and that's The Half-Life of Valerie K by Natasha Pulley. I pre-ordered this book and I was so excited for it to come, and it definitely didn't let me down. So this is a departure, I suppose, from Natasha Pulley's usual time period, in that it's set in Russia in like the 1960s around, I think. Instead of back in the Victorian era or another period like the books I'd read for previously. The book starts off when a former nuclear specialist called Valery Kolkanov is in a gulag. He's actually withdrawn from the gulag by the authorities to go to this lab which is studying the effect of radiation on things. It has Natasha Pulley's like signature style. It's kind of hard to know what is a spoiler for these books, because anybody that's read one Natasha Pulley book kind of knows, but I won't say anything anyways. But needless to say, it follows Valery as he is maybe finding some things out about this facility that he shouldn't, and also he gets to know, of all things, a KGB agent there. So yeah, just she has such a quirky way of writing things that is just really fun to read, and sometimes you find yourself laughing at inappropriate times when things are set in gulags. But one example, I suppose, it'd be they're talking about what paper they roll tobacco up in to make a cigarette, and it says that some people took care to find pictures of Lenin or Stalin or other things they hated, like marriage bans or cheese adverts, but it was ideal to do the crossword and then smoke it. That was a lot of mileage from one piece of paper. So I don't know, she describes things in such a strange way that is really entertaining. So I love Natasha Pulley for that reason. This book was a little bit different from other Natasha Pulley's as well, not only in the time period, but also her books have kind of a fantastical element to some of them, but this had no fantastical element at all. It was just the physics, just the science, and I really enjoyed that. And another thing that stood out to me in this book is maybe the one like gripe I have with Natasha Pulley is I don't like love the way she treats her female characters, but the female character in this book is a massive improvement to my eyes anyways. So yeah, it didn't top The Kingdoms for me, which remains my favourite Natasha Pulley book and probably my favourite book ever, but this book was definitely a close second. Brilliant. I definitely will be rereading this. I'll see if I can hold off another year, because I still have to read the Bedlam stacks as well. As the last Natasha Pulley I haven't read, but yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I definitely will pre-order anything she's releasing straight away because she's wonderful. So the next book is kind of a strange one, and I couldn't really decide whether to put it in the honourable mentions or the favourites, but in the end I had to decide I had to go in the favourites just because it was so ingenious and I consumed it so quickly and I enjoyed it so much at the time. The only thing, it hasn't stuck with me a huge amount, so maybe it should be in the honourable mentions, but it's definitely on that bridge. But that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This, of course, is a booktube sensation. I was a bit late to the party, but it was Brilliant, brilliant book. It starts off in France in 1714, and this girl called Addie LaRue, through various circumstances, she is supposed to be married to this much older man, and she makes a deal with the devil to get her out of it. But part of the bargain that was struck, I suppose, is that nobody will remember her. She can live forever, but as she goes through the world, people only remember her while they're talking to her and while they're looking at her, and they don't remember her after that. They forget immediately. So it's just the way that was set up was so clever, and just obviously the way that was explored. It is on the back cover, but I don't really want to say the twist that there is in the middle of the book. I suppose not really a twist, it's just a factor of the plot, but I think it'd be better if it wasn't on the back cover. There is kind of a mystery element to it as well, but I was dying to know the mystery as well, and I was reading, but what really stood out, really, I loved all the contrivances on how Addie was living. I loved kind of sometimes how she was able to turn it to her advantage, how she overcame difficulties, where does she live, because no landlord would remember that they'd rented a flat to her. How is she going to get money because she can't have a job because her employer would forget about her, just all those little things. So I just was more interested, I suppose, in the mechanisms of how you'd live like that. It was a brilliant book, and I'd really recommend An Inspired Idea. The next book I'm going to talk about then was, I suppose, an author that I found this year, and that is The Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting by K.J. Charles. I've read a few works by this author this year, but this was definitely my favourite, and its companion novella, A Thief in the Night. K.J. Charles writes so well. I think a lot of her books are kind of self-published, but you wouldn't be able to tell. It's an LGBTQ plus Regency romance, but although it is a romance, there's definitely a lot else going on in the plot. The plot follows these two siblings who go to London for the season to try and make two matches for themselves, because they don't really have any money. They just have the appearance of having money, so they're basically trying to trap people, or they're fortune hunters, as the title would imply. Meanwhile, Sir John is in London with his sister and his niece, it's her first season, and Sir John, I suppose, is trying to warn people off, that because she has a fortune, and the ways that those two families become entwined. There's just such great characters. They're so funny. There's some explicit scenes, but I didn't find them too much at all. It's definitely like a modern take on the Regency romance genre, both for the LGBTQ plus elements, but also I suppose kind of more modern sensibilities brought to it in a really enjoyable way. The women characters are brilliant. I can't remember the niece's name, but she's really interested in maths, and it's just a great book. I listened to an audiobook, and I'd really recommend the audiobook as well. So it was just a really fun read, and I think it'll definitely be comfort reading for me for years to come. So I loved it a lot. So the next book then I also listened to an audiobook, and that is the second book in the Nevermore series, which is called The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a very well known children's book series. There's 3 books out at the moment, and my favourite is definitely the second. I don't want to go into any details about it here because it's obviously the second book in the series, and I don't want to spoil people. But in a nutshell, the Nevermore series follows this girl called Morrigan Crow, who is supposed to have died on her 11th birthday. She's a cursed child, but she actually ends up being rescued by this man called Jupiter North and brought to this place called Nevermore to live. Nevermore is kind of a magical type of kingdom, I suppose. This is obviously a children's series, but very enjoyable to me too as an adult. The mythology of the world is great, but it's really the characters and relationships in this that stand out in this book series, and in particular the second book, which is why it was my favourite. Morrigan is getting to know her mentor Jupiter North a lot more, and sometimes they struggle a little bit, but really is her peers. There's a lot of this about loyalty and trying to fit in, and they have various reasons not to like her, and there's a lot of angst going on, and it's such a wonderful book, and I tore through the audio. I'd really recommend the audio for this series if you can, because it's told really well. And the last book I'm going to talk about then is this one, Hamish by Maggie O'Farrell. I read this back in September, and it was definitely not what I expected. So again, I suppose another Women's Prize winner, and one that's been very much hyped on BookTube. But this follows the family of William Shakespeare, though William Shakespeare is of course never named. In particular, the death of his son Hamish at the age of, I think it was 11. So that's what you know from the back cover, but the book isn't really what you'd expect at all from that. I don't want to spoil it for anybody because that I went in not knowing it. It was such a lovely surprise, I suppose. It was lovely being a bit of a weird word for it, but I will say it's extremely slow paced, very descriptive, and this flashes back to the past about like William Shakespeare getting to know his wife, and yeah, it's just really just portraits of all of the family members as they go through life and deal with difficult events. And yeah, just I wouldn't usually be one for a lot of description, but this book was definitely the exception. It was just so vivid, and again, I have so many passages in this underlined. I can't really say a lot more about it apart from like how beautiful it was. Definitely I'll be reading more Maggie Farrell. I haven't yet, but if it's anyway half as good as Hamlet, it'll be great. So yeah, that's it. That's my favourite books of 2022. Do let me know what your favourite books of 2022 were, or if you've read any of these ones. I'd love to know I'd love to know in particular if anybody didn't like any of these books. Let's make it really exciting. And yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday for my next video.